The wind didn't howl. It cut. Gandalf felt it stripping heat from his bones despite the ward he'd woven around their small group, a thin shell of warmth that shimmered faintly in the air like heat rising from summer stone. Except this wasn't summer, and the stone beneath their feet was so cold it burned through boot leather. "How long can you hold it?" Aragorn asked, his voice tight with something that wasn't quite pain but close enough to matter. "Long enough," Gandalf said. Then, because lying to Aragorn had never worked and wouldn't start working now, "As long as we keep moving. If we stop, the ward collapses, and if the ward collapses, we freeze," Stella finished. She had the key song shard wrapped in 3 layers of cloth and pressed against her chest inside her coat. Even through all that insulation, Gandalf could feel it humming, a frequency just below audible sound that made his teeth ache if he paid attention to it. They stood at the edge of what the locals called the White Zone, a stretch of highland that had gone wrong in ways that defied natural explanation. The visibility was maybe 20 feet on a good day. Today wasn't a good day. The fog pressed in like something solid, and the wind moved through it in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Aragorn tested his grip on his sword hilt and winced. His left shoulder, the one that had taken the troll's glancing blow back at Wraithkeep, was stiff, the fingers of that hand slightly numb. He'd been flexing them periodically for the last hour, trying to keep blood flowing, trying to maintain the dexterity that might mean the difference between a clean strike and a fatal hesitation. "It's not getting better," he said flatly. "It's not getting worse either," Gandalf replied, "which means you can still use it, and we're going to need you to use it." Kael'Rin, the tracker they'd picked up 2 days ago in the last village before the zone, was crouched 20 feet ahead, examining the snow with the focused attention of someone reading a language most people didn't know existed. He was young for his reputation, maybe 30, with the kind of weathered face that came from spending more time outdoors than in. His hands moved across the snow surface without quite touching it, following patterns Gandalf couldn't see. "Formation," Kael'Rin said without looking up. "Multiple people moving in synchronized cadence, and drag marks. They're carrying weight, something heavy, or someone who can't walk on their own." "The candidate," Stella said. Her voice had gone flat in the way it did when she was trying very hard not to feel something. "They've already taken someone. The candidate, the person the cult had selected for their crowning ritual, the ceremony that would stabilize the rift in the White Zone and make this nightmare landscape permanent, turn it from a temporary wound in reality into a permanent scar." Gandalf had explained the mechanics on the way here. The cult believed that by crowning a living person, binding them to the rift with iron and lacquer and the broken pieces of the key song, they could force the zone to crystallize, to become fixed, a new kind of geography where the normal rules didn't apply and sound itself became a weapon or a prison depending on how you used it. It was brilliant in the way truly terrible ideas sometimes were. Elegant, precise, utterly monstrous. "How far ahead?" Aragorn asked. Kael'Rin stood, brushing snow from his gloves. "Maybe an hour, maybe less. The tracks are fresh, within the last 2 hours definitely, but—" He paused, and Gandalf saw the tracker's expression shift into something that wasn't quite confusion, but wasn't confidence either. "But what?" Gandalf prompted. "The cadence," Kael'Rin said slowly. "It's too perfect. People don't walk that synchronized naturally. Not over distance, not in conditions like this. It's like they're counting steps, matching rhythm deliberately." "The Lacquered," Stella said. She'd gone pale. "That's what the cult calls them in the journals. People they've processed, coated with some kind of binding agent that makes them compliant, synchronized. They move in formation because they can't move any other way." Gandalf felt something cold settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. "How many can the cult create?" "I don't know," Stella admitted. "The journals were vague, but if they've been working in the White Zone for weeks, if they've had access to travelers, refugees, anyone who wandered too close. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. The wind dropped suddenly, not gradually. 1 second it was cutting through them, the next it was just gone. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of sound being actively suppressed, like cotton stuffed deep into ears, like the world holding its breath. "The zone is breathing," Kael'Rin said quietly. "That's what the locals call it. The white zone breathes. Sound drops out for a few seconds, then comes back. No one knows why." Gandalf knew why. The zone wasn't breathing. It was listening, testing, searching for something that resonated with whatever broken piece of the key song was feeding it. The sound returned as abruptly as it had vanished. Wind, the creak of leather, Aragorn's slightly labored breathing from the cold and the altitude and the injury he was managing through pure stubbornness, and something else, distant, rhythmic, footfalls that matched the wind's cadence too perfectly to be coincidence. "They know we're here," Aragorn said. "They've always known," Gandalf replied. "They're not running from us. They're leading us exactly where they want us to go." Kael'Rin's hand moved to the knife at his belt, not drawing it, just touching the hilt, a nervous gesture, or a preparatory one. "Then we're walking into a trap." "Yes," Gandalf said, "but we're walking into it anyway, because the alternative is letting them complete the ritual unopposed, and that's not an alternative I'm willing to accept." He could feel the ward around them flickering slightly, the first sign that maintaining it was beginning to cost more than he was comfortable spending. They needed to move. Now, before the cold found the gaps in his working and started eating through the warmth he was generating. "Stay close," he ordered. "Watch your footing. Don't stop unless I tell you to stop. And if you hear the silence coming, if the world starts to go quiet, warn the others immediately." They moved forward in a tight formation, Kael'Rin ahead reading the trail, Aragorn and Stella in the middle, weapons ready, Gandalf at the rear, staff raised, the ward humming around them like a promise he wasn't entirely sure he could keep. The rhythmic footfalls ahead grew slightly louder, not closer, just clearer, as if whatever was making them wanted to be heard, wanted them to know they were being paced, matched, counted. The white zone stretched ahead into fog that revealed nothing and promised everything. Somewhere in that whiteness, people were being carried toward a fate worse than death. Somewhere ahead, iron clamps were being arranged in patterns that would turn human suffering into permanent architecture. And somewhere, though Gandalf couldn't see it yet, something was moving in perfect lockstep, waiting for them to get close enough to matter. The wind cut, the ward held, they kept walking. The fog didn't lift so much as shift, revealing and concealing in rhythms that felt deliberate, like something breathing just out of sight. Gandalf watched the patterns, trying to read intent in the way visibility contracted and expanded, and found himself increasingly certain that the white zone wasn't just geography, it was active, aware in some limited, hungry way. "We're going in circles," Stella said. Her voice had the flat quality of someone trying very hard not to panic. "That rock formation, we passed it 10 minutes ago." Aragorn stopped, studying the stones she'd indicated. 3 boulders stacked in a configuration that looked almost deliberate, except the surfaces were weathered smooth. Gaps filled with ice that had clearly been there for years. "She's right," he confirmed. "Same formation, same angle." Kael'Rin was already examining the snow around the rocks, hands moving in quick, efficient patterns, testing depth, checking for disturbances, reading information in textures Gandalf could barely perceive. "Not circles," the tracker said. "Loops. The terrain is repeating, but we're not retracing our path. Our tracks from before should be here if we'd circled back, but there's nothing. The white zone doesn't follow normal rules," Gandalf said. He could feel it now, a wrongness in how space was behaving, like the landscape folding in on itself in ways geometry shouldn't permit. "It's presenting the same landmarks repeatedly, creating the illusion of circular motion while we're actually progressing forward." "Why?" Aragorn asked. Disorientation, Kael'Rin answered. Make us doubt our navigation. Make us stop and argue. And the moment we stop, he didn't finish. They all understood. Stopping meant the ward collapsed. The ward collapsing meant the cold got in. And the cold in the White Zone didn't just freeze, it ate. Keep moving, Gandalf ordered. Kael'Rin, what does the trail say? The tracker pointed ahead. Drag marks continue that direction. Consistent depth, consistent spacing. They're moving with purpose toward a specific destination. Then we follow, Aragorn said, adjusting his sword grip. His left hand was still stiff, but he was managing. The silence came back, that sudden, absolute absence of sound that felt like pressure against the eardrums. 3 seconds, 4, 5. Then sound returned in a rush. It's doing it more frequently, Stella observed. Every few minutes now instead of every 10. She was right. The zone was becoming more active, cycles compressing, which meant they were getting closer to something significant. The rift, probably. The tear in reality the cult was trying to stabilize. Gandalf could feel it if he focused, a wrongness ahead that pulled at awareness like a wound pulling at stitches. The key song shard in Stella's coat was resonating with it, humming in sympathy with whatever broken music fed the zone. We need to talk about the shard, he said quietly. Stella's hand moved to her chest, pressing the wrapped bundle. What about it? How many times can you use it before it fails? I don't know, she admitted. The journals mentioned degradation with repeated use, structural failure if pushed too hard, but no exact numbers. We're going to need it, Gandalf said. The Lacquered, if they move in synchronized formation, normal combat won't work. We'll need to break their cadence, and the only tool we have is the shard. But if we use it too early, Aragorn said, we won't have it at the ritual site. And if we don't use it when needed, Gandalf countered, we won't reach the ritual site at all. The fundamental problem of limited resources, spend too freely and have nothing when it mattered, hoard too carefully and die with unused tools. No balance, just increasingly bad choices and hope you pick the least catastrophic. The fog shifted, revealing something new. Movement ahead and left. Not wind-driven snow, but deliberate motion. Something large, moving with fluid grace through terrain that should have made that impossible. There, Kael'Rin whispered. Do you see it? A silhouette in the fog, tall, elegant, 4 legs, long neck, and a crown of antlers branching like winter trees. A stag, Stella breathed. A white stag, coat the same color as the fog, making it seem spectral. It moved without fear, stopped, turned to look directly at them with eyes that caught and reflected light like mirrors. Then it began walking again, parallel to their path, matching their pace exactly, maintaining distance. Is it real? Stella asked. Define real, Gandalf replied. In the White Zone, normal categories became uncomfortably flexible. Kael'Rin watched with focused attention. It's following the living trails. Living trails? Aragorn asked. Pockets where the zone weakens, the tracker explained. Places where sound doesn't vanish as completely, where the cold isn't quite as hungry. Animals can sense them. The locals call them living trails because they're the only routes that don't guarantee death. And if we follow it, Gandalf said, we stay on the living trail, Kael'Rin finished. Avoid the dead loops, the parts that kill through disorientation. It made sense, too much sense, which made Gandalf suspicious. The zone wasn't generous. If the stag was guiding them towards safer passage, it had a reason, and that reason probably wasn't benevolent. Could be a trap, Aragorn said. Could be, Gandalf agreed. But it's the only navigation aid we have. I'll take a suspicious guide over guaranteed disorientation. Stella watched the stag. It's beautiful. Is that wrong? To think something here could be beautiful? Beauty and danger aren't mutually exclusive, Gandalf said. The question isn't whether it's beautiful. The question is what it wants. The stag continued its parallel path, never closer, never behind, Movements precise, economical, no wasted energy. They adjusted course to follow, and Gandalf immediately felt the difference. The ward stopped flickering quite so badly. The cold pressing against it seemed fractionally less aggressive. The fog developed a grain, a directionality that made orientation slightly easier. "The living trail," Kael'Rin confirmed. "We're on it. Still dangerous, but not fighting as hard." "How long will it last?" Aragorn asked. "No way to know," the tracker said. "Living trails shift. They're temporary paths of lesser resistance. The stag knows where they are now. An hour from now they might be somewhere different," which meant keeping the stag in sight, maintaining pace, trusting it was leading them somewhere they wanted to go. Gandalf watched the creature and felt the familiar weight of a choice he didn't want to make. Trust the suspicious guide, or trust nothing and guarantee failure. "Stay close to it," he ordered, "but not too close. If it's leading us into danger, I want distance to react." They walked, the fog breathed, sound vanishing and returning in cycles, coming faster every 2 or 3 minutes. Each silence felt heavier, like the zone was testing them. Stella stumbled on hidden ice, caught herself, kept moving. Aragorn's breathing developed a slight rasp. Kael'Rin moved economically, conserving energy, and Gandalf maintained the ward, feeling it drain him degree by degree. The stag led them up an incline, and as they crested the rise, fog thinned enough to reveal what lay ahead. A pass, narrow, walled by rock faces that looked deliberately carved, terrain that funneled movement, forced single file, turned navigation into an irreversible commitment. And blocking the pass completely, a wall of people. Not moving, not speaking, standing in perfect formation, shoulder to shoulder, creating a human barrier across the entire width. "Lacquered," Stella whispered, real fear in her voice. Something was wrong about them. They stood too still, postures too uniform. At the seams, neck to shoulder, wrist emerging from sleeve, there was a faint sheen, black and glossy, like lacquer dried, but somehow remaining liquid. The stag stopped at the rise, looked back once, then continued forward, not toward the blockade, around it, skirting the pass entirely, vanishing into fog. It wasn't leading them away from danger. It was leading them toward confrontation. Deliberately, as if the entire purpose of the living trail was delivering them to exactly this moment in exactly this place. "Gandalf," Aragorn said quietly, sword already drawn. "What do we do?" Gandalf studied the human wall, counted bodies, at least 12, maybe more in the fog, watched for weak points, gaps, anything suggesting this wasn't a prepared defensive position designed to stop exactly what they were attempting. "We go through them," he said, "because there's no going around. But carefully. These people are victims, not enemies. We break the formation without breaking the people. Understood?" Stella's hand moved to the wrapped shard. "I think this is where we use it." "The first time." Gandalf nodded. "Kael'Rin, can you identify how they're maintaining synchronization?" The tracker's eyes narrowed. "Give me a minute." The Lacquered weren't advancing, just waiting, perfectly still, perfectly synchronized, a wall that didn't need to move. Behind them, the zone breathed, sound dropping away for 5 seconds, then 6, then 7 before returning, getting worse, getting closer. "Kael'Rin," Gandalf said, "time's up. What have you got?" The tracker pointed. "There. Watch their heads. Micro movements, tiny tilts, shared timing. They're breathing in sync. That's the mechanism. Maintain the rhythm. The formation holds." "Then we break the rhythm," Stella said, unwrapping the shard with shaking hands. "Carefully," Gandalf emphasized. "The shard is our lifeline. We use exactly as much as we need." The shard caught light and threw it back in patterns that hurt to look at. Geometry that didn't quite make sense. The lacquered wall waited, the zone breathed, and somewhere ahead the rift pulsed with broken music. "On my signal," Gandalf said, raising his staff. "Stella, you'll have one chance. Make it count." The Lacquered didn't move as Gandalf's group approached. They simply stood, 12 bodies forming a seamless barrier across the pass, hands linked at their sides, faces forward, eyes open but somehow empty, like dolls arranged by careful hands and then abandoned. "Stop here," Kael'Rin said quietly when they were still 20 feet out. "Let me read them first." Aragorn halted, sword held low but ready. His left hand was gripping the pommel tighter than usual, compensating for the numbness in his fingers. Stella stayed close to Gandalf, the unwrapped shard clutched against her chest, its surface catching the dim light and fragmenting it into colors that shouldn't exist together. Kael'Rin moved forward alone, steps careful, studying the human wall with the same focused attention he'd given the tracks. He didn't get close enough to touch, just near enough to observe details. After a long moment, he stepped back. "Victims," he confirmed. "You can see it in the micro-expressions. There's awareness trapped under whatever's controlling them, fear in the eyes, tension in the jaw muscles. They're conscious, but not in control." "The lacquer," Stella said. She'd gone pale. "It's not just coding them. It's conducting, creating a network. That's what the cult journals described. A binding agent that links people together, forces synchronization. They become nodes in a larger pattern." Gandalf could see it now that he knew to look. At the points where bodies touched, shoulder to shoulder, hand to hand, the black sheen was thicker. Glossy threads connecting one person to the next, like a web made of solidified oil. "Can we break it without hurting them?" Aragorn asked. "That's the question," Gandalf replied. He raised his staff, letting a small pulse of warmth gather at the tip, not enough to threaten, just enough to test. The heat washed over the nearest lacquered figure, and Gandalf watched carefully for the reaction. The lacquer didn't burn. It didn't even seem to warm. Instead, it became somehow more present, the sheen intensifying, the threads between bodies thickening slightly, as if heat made it stronger rather than weaker. "Fire won't work," he said, letting the warmth dissipate. "The binding responds to heat by consolidating. We'd just be making it worse." "Then how?" Stella began. The lacquered moved, not breaking formation, staying perfectly linked but shifting as a unit. Hands that had been at their sides rose in unison, reaching forward, not grabbing yet, just extending. A dozen pairs of arms moving with mechanical precision, creating a wall of grasping hands where moments before there had been stillness. "They know we're a threat," Kael'Rin said, already backing up. "The network is adaptive. It's responding to our presence." Aragorn tested the reach carefully, extending his sword toward the nearest set of hands. The moment the blade entered their range, fingers closed around it, not one person grabbing but three simultaneously, hands clamping onto the steel with synchronized pressure. He tried to pull back. The hands held firm. Worse, the lacquer where skin met metal began to spread, black threads creeping along the blade toward the hilt. "It's trying to stick," Aragorn said tightly. He twisted the sword, applying leverage, and managed to wrench it free. But when he looked at the blade, there were dark smears along the fuller, residue that hadn't been there before. "It's adhesive. If it gets a solid grip, it won't let go." Stella's breathing had gone shallow. The journals mentioned that, once the lacquer bonds to something organic, skin, cloth, leather, it becomes nearly impossible to separate. People who tried to help victims ended up becoming victims themselves, glued together, absorbed into the network. "Then we don't let them touch us," Gandalf said. "We break the synchronization without engaging physically." Stella, the shard. Kael'Rin said they're maintaining rhythm through breathing. "Can you disrupt that?" Stella looked down at the shard in her hands. It was humming now, a frequency just below audible sound that made Gandalf's teeth ache. The fragment knew it was close to the rift. It was resonating with the broken key song that fed the White Zone. "I think so," she said. "If I can create a counter-rhythm, something that clashes with their synchronization, it should break the pattern, at least temporarily." "How temporarily?" Aragorn asked. "I don't know." she admitted, "and I don't know what it'll cost. The shard is already cracked. Look." She turned it so they could see, a hairline fracture running diagonally across one face, so thin it was barely visible except when light caught it wrong. "That wasn't there before," Gandalf said. "No," Stella confirmed. "It happened at Wraithkeep. When we used it against the White Hunger, every use degrades it. If we push too hard, it shatters," Kael'Rin finished. "And then we have nothing. The fundamental problem again, limited resources, unlimited need. Use the shard now and risk not having it later. Don't use it and guarantee they wouldn't reach later at all. Small pulse only," Gandalf decided. "Just enough to break their rhythm and create an opening. We're not trying to save all of them right now. Just get through the formation. Understood?" Stella nodded, though her hands were shaking. "I'll need a tempo, something to build the counter rhythm against." Kael'Rin stepped forward. "I can do that. Watch their breathing. See the pattern? In 2-3, out 2-3, perfect mechanical cadence. If Stella sings against that, offbeat, wrong intervals, it should create dissonance in the network." "And dissonance breaks synchronization," Gandalf said. "Good. Positions. Aragorn, be ready to move the moment they falter. Don't engage. Just push through the gap. Stella, you'll have maybe 5 seconds of disruption. Use them." They arranged themselves, Kael'Rin watching the Lacquered counting their breath rhythm under his breath, Stella holding the shard with both hands now, eyes closed, clearly trying to feel the pattern, Aragorn coiled, ready to move, Gandalf maintaining the ward and preparing to shield them if the lacquer tried to spread during the disruption. "On 3, Kael'Rin said. 1, 2, 3, Stella sang. It wasn't words, just vocalized tones, deliberately discordant, hitting intervals that clashed with the mechanical breathing of the Lacquered. The shard amplified it, taking her voice and pushing it outward in waves that Gandalf could almost see, ripples of wrong sound cutting through the synchronized pattern. The effect was immediate. 2 of the Lacquered in the center of the formation blinked. Actual, genuine blinks, not the mechanical stare they'd held before. Their hands dropped slightly. The rhythm faltered. "Now," Gandalf shouted. Aragorn moved, driving forward through the gap that was forming as the 2 disrupted figures stumbled out of formation. He used his shoulder, not his sword, pushing bodies aside rather than cutting through them. One of the Lacquered grabbed at him. He twisted away before the lacquer could bond, leaving the grasping hand holding nothing but air. Stella's voice cracked on a high note. The shard's hum intensified, becoming almost painful. Gandalf saw the hairline fracture widen, not much, just a fraction, but visible now even without special light. Another Lacquered broke free of the pattern. This one made a sound, a choked gasp like someone surfacing from deep water. A woman, Gandalf realized, middle-aged with gray at her temples and a cultist's brand barely visible at her collar. She looked around with eyes that were suddenly terribly aware. She started. "Where? What?" Then she collapsed, knees buckling, the sudden return of autonomy, too much after however long she'd spent as a node in someone else's pattern. The formation was collapsing. Lacquered stumbling, hands reaching for each other to maintain the network, but finding only empty air as the synchronization failed. The wall became a loose collection of confused, frightened people. Some falling, some crying, all of them suddenly very human and very vulnerable. "Through!" Kael'Rin shouted, already moving, pulling Stella with him as her voice finally gave out and the shard went silent. They pushed through the gap, Gandalf last, maintaining the ward, watching to make sure none of the freed Lacquered tried to follow. But they didn't. They were too disoriented, too overwhelmed by sudden consciousness after forced sleep. The pass opened up ahead. The human wall was behind them now, breaking apart, no longer a barrier, but the cost was visible in Stella's hands. The shard had a crack now, not hairline anymore, but clearly visible, running a quarter of the way across its surface. It still hummed, still resonated with the distant rift, but it looked fragile in a way it hadn't before. "One use," Gandalf said quietly, "and already damaged." But it worked, Aragorn pointed out. He was breathing hard, left shoulder clearly paining him where he'd used it to push through the formation. We're through. They're free. At least some of them. Behind them, the woman who'd gasped was being helped to her feet by another freed Lacquered, a younger man, maybe her son, both of them crying and holding each other with the desperate grip of people who'd thought they'd lost everything. Victims, Stella said softly. They were all victims, and we had to hurt them to save them. We disrupted the control, Gandalf corrected. We gave them back autonomy. What happens to them now is up to them. Kael'Rin was already moving ahead, checking the pass. The main formation is still ahead, he called back. This was just a blockade, a delay tactic. They're still carrying the candidate toward the ritual site. Then we keep moving, Gandalf said. He could feel the ward flickering, the energy expenditure of the last few minutes catching up to him. They needed to keep pace, keep warm, keep ahead of the cold that was always pressing in. The white zone breathed again. Sound dropped away for 7 seconds this time. When it returned, Gandalf heard something new in the distance. Rhythmic movement, faster than before, like the main formation had realized the blockade failed and was accelerating. They know we're coming, Aragorn said. They've always known, Gandalf replied. They're just recalculating how much time they have, which means we need to recalculate too. Faster now. The living trail won't last forever, and neither will our window to stop this. They moved forward, leaving the freed Lacquered behind in the pass, leaving the broken formation and the first use of the shard and the visible crack that promised worse costs ahead. The fog closed in, the cold pressed harder, and somewhere ahead the rift pulsed with hunger. The pass opened onto a wide expanse of ice that looked like someone had taken a frozen lake and polished it until it reflected the gray sky like a mirror. Gandalf stopped at the edge, staff planted, studying the surface with the careful attention of someone who'd seen too many natural-looking traps. "That's not natural ice," he said. Kael'Rin crouched at the boundary where snow met the glassy surface, running his hand just above it without touching. "You're right. Look at the uniformity. No cracks, no variation in thickness. It's too perfect. The white zone made this." "Made it or shaped it?" Aragorn asked. "Does it matter?" Stella said. She was still holding the cracked shard, cradling it against her chest like something that might shatter if she breathed wrong. "Either way, it's between us and them." She was right. Across the ice flat, maybe 300 yards distant, Gandalf could see movement. Dark shapes moving in formation, the synchronized rhythm visible even at this distance. The Lacquered, and somewhere in the middle of that formation, being carried like cargo, was the candidate. "They're moving fast," Kael'Rin observed. "Faster than they should be able to on that surface. Look, they're not slipping. Their feet are finding purchase like the ice isn't even there." Gandalf watched more carefully. The tracker was right. The Lacquered moved across the ice with the same mechanical efficiency they'd shown everywhere else. No hesitation, no adjustment for the slickness underfoot, as if the surface was cooperating with them. "The zone is helping them," he said, "or at least not hindering them, which means it will hinder us." "We don't have a choice," Aragorn said. He tested the ice with one boot, felt it immediately try to slide out from under him, and caught himself on the rock face. "If we go around, we lose them. By the time we find another route, the ritual will be complete." "Then we go across," Gandalf decided. "But carefully. Kael'Rin, can you find us a path?" The tracker was already studying the ice, looking for variations in surface texture, testing for any indication of better footing. After a moment, he shook his head. "It's uniform all the way across. No safe route. We'll have to create our own traction." "I can help with that," Gandalf said. He raised his staff, letting heat gather at the tip. Just enough to matter, not enough to drain him completely. Brief pulses, melted spots for footing, but it will cost me, and I can't sustain it for long. "How long?" Stella asked. "Long enough to get across," Gandalf said. "Probably, if we move fast and don't stop." He didn't mention what would happen if they did stop. Didn't need to. They all understood the mathematics by now. The ward was already stretched thin, his reserves were depleting, and every additional expenditure made the final confrontation that much more precarious. "Stay close," he ordered. "I'll mark the path. You follow exactly. No deviation." He stepped onto the ice, staff blazing with controlled heat, and immediately felt the surface resist him. Not physically. The ice didn't try to grab or hold, but thermally. The heat he was pouring into it dissipated faster than it should, like the cold was actively drinking the warmth before it could do its work. Still, he managed. Small spots of melted ice, just deep enough to provide grip. He stepped, melted, stepped again. Behind him, Aragorn followed, then Stella, then Kael'Rin bringing up the rear. They made it maybe 50 feet before Aragorn's boots lost purchase. It happened fast. One moment he was stepping carefully in Gandalf's footprints, the next, his left foot, the one connected to the injured shoulder, slipped sideways. He tried to compensate, overcorrected, and went down hard on his side. The impact drove the air from his lungs in a visible puff of white vapor. The sword flew from his numbed grip and skittered across the ice, sliding 10 feet before stopping. "Aragorn!" Stella lunged toward him, nearly lost her own footing, managed to stay upright through sheer desperate balance. Gandalf turned, already feeling the ward flicker as his concentration broke. The cold pressed in immediately, opportunistic, hungry, testing the gaps. Aragorn tried to push himself up, but the ice offered no purchase. His hands slid uselessly. Worse, the cold was seeping through his clothes now, drawing heat from his core with terrifying speed. Gandalf could see it happening, the slight tremor becoming a visible shiver, the controlled breathing becoming shallow gasps. "Don't move," Kael'Rin commanded. He was already pulling rope from his pack, thin climbing line, probably meant for mountain terrain. He formed a quick loop, tested the knot, and threw it. The rope landed across Aragorn's chest. "Grab it," the tracker said. "Carefully. Don't pull. Just hold." Aragorn's cold, numbed fingers closed around the rope. Kael'Rin braced himself, feet wide, and began hauling. Not fast, steady, controlled, giving Aragorn time to help without making things worse. Gandalf maintained the ward, feeling it drain him with every second. The ice beneath them had started doing something wrong. He could feel it even if he couldn't see it clearly. Small vibrations like the surface was humming in sympathy with the distant rift. The white zone recognizing their vulnerability and pressing the advantage. Stella moved to help pull, and for a moment Gandalf thought they'd manage it cleanly. Then the ice cracked, not beneath Aragorn, beneath Stella. A sharp sound like a branch snapping, followed by the sick crunch of surface giving way. She dropped waist-deep into freezing water that shouldn't exist beneath ice, this thick, screaming as the cold hit her like a physical blow. The shard flew from her hands, skittering across the ice toward the edge of the hole. "The shard!" Kael'Rin shouted, but he couldn't reach for it without letting go of the rope holding Aragorn. Gandalf moved on instinct, heat from the staff, directed not at the ice but at the water. Flash boiled just enough to give Stella a moment to catch her breath. His other hand extended, trying to pull her out, but she was too far and the angle was wrong. Something white moved in his peripheral vision. The stag. It appeared from nowhere, or had been there all along, and Gandalf simply hadn't noticed in the chaos. It planted itself at the edge of the ice hole, lowered its magnificent antlers, and braced. "Grab on!" Gandalf shouted to Stella. She understood immediately. One hand caught the nearest antler point, fingers wrapping around the bone with the grip of someone who understood this was survival. The stag didn't flinch, didn't pull away. It simply held position, solid as stone. Gandalf used the moment. Heat directed under Stella, flash warming the water just enough to stop the immediate hypothermia. Kael'Rin, still holding Aragorn's rope with one hand, extended his staff towards Stella with the other. She grabbed it, and together, tracker, wizard, and inexplicably helpful stag, they hauled her out of the water. She came up gasping, soaked, shaking so hard her teeth chattered, but alive. Aragorn was already on his feet, retrieved sword in hand, moving toward them despite his own near disaster. "The shard," Stella managed through chattering teeth. "Where?" It was still on the ice, 3 feet from the hole. Visible, intact, but the crack that had been a quarter of the way across was now nearly halfway. The stress of hitting the ice had propagated the damage. Kael'Rin scooped it up, wrapped it quickly, and handed it to Stella. "Still functional, but it won't take many more shocks." Gandalf felt the ward guttering. The heat he'd spent pulling Stella from hypothermia had cost him. They had maybe minutes before the cold found the gaps and started doing real damage. "We run," he said. "No more careful steps. We run, and we accept the slips, and we get across before the zone decides to open more holes." "Gandalf," Aragorn started. "Now!" Gandalf snapped and started moving. They ran, slipping, sliding, scrambling for purchase on ice that actively resisted them. Gandalf marked footprints with heat when he could, but mostly they just moved, fast, reckless, trusting momentum over caution. Behind them, more cracks appeared, the ice responding to their passage, or the zone deciding to make things worse, or both. Water welled up through the gaps, dark, cold, smelling of things that shouldn't live this far from proper rivers. Stella fell twice. Aragorn caught her the first time, nearly went down himself the second. Kael'Rin moved like someone who'd trained on ice, feet finding purchase through instinct rather than sight. And the stag paced them, not helping now, just present, moving on a parallel track, never quite close enough to touch, but always visible. Leading or following, Gandalf couldn't tell. The far side of the ice flat approached. Solid ground, blessed rock and snow instead of treacherous mirror surface. Gandalf could see the Lacquered formation ahead. They'd slowed, turned partially, watching the pursuit, waiting to see if the ice would do their work for them. 50 feet, 30, 20. Aragorn's boot went through weak ice. He powered through it, legs soaked to the knee, but still moving. Stella stumbled, caught herself, kept going. 10 feet. The ward collapsed. Gandalf felt it go, not dramatically, just a quiet failure as his reserves finally hit bottom. The cold rushed in immediately, stealing breath, making joints stiffen. 5 feet. They hit solid ground in a scrambling heap. Kael'Rin first, turning to help the others up. Stella second, still clutching the wrapped shard. Aragorn third, limping slightly on the soaked leg. Gandalf last, staff planted, trying to pull together enough heat to matter. Behind them, the ice flat groaned. Several of the cracks widened, water flooding across the surface, turning the mirror into a broken mosaic. The safe path they'd taken, if it could be called safe, was gone now. No going back that way. Ahead, the Lacquered formation resumed its march. Faster now. They'd gained time while Gandalf's group struggled across the ice. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe more. Enough to matter. Gandalf looked up and saw ruins ahead. Stone walls half buried in snow, an escarpment rising sharply, and on the cliff face something that made his breath catch. The Lacquered weren't running anymore. They were climbing, forming a vertical formation, a living ladder made of bodies, hands gripping hands, lacquer bonding at the connection points, creating a structure that shouldn't be possible but very clearly was. "They're going up," Kael'Rin said unnecessarily. The stag appeared beside them, breathing hard, frost forming on its muzzle. It looked at the cliff, then at Gandalf, then started moving toward a different route, a natural path, harder to see but not requiring the impossible climbing the Lacquered were managing. "It's showing us the way," Stella said. "Or leading us into another trap," Aragorn countered. "We follow it anyway," Gandalf decided, "because the alternative is trying to climb through a wall of Lacquered victims, and I don't think we have the strength or the stomach for that." They followed the stag, cold, soaked, exhausted, with a cracked shard and dwindling resources, but still moving, still chasing. Above them, the living ladder climbed toward something Gandalf couldn't quite see through the fog. The ritual site, probably. The place where the rift waited, hungry and patient, The cliff face rose vertically for maybe 60 feet, steep enough that climbing it would require equipment, time, and energy they didn't have. The Lacquered had none of those problems. They simply made themselves into the solution. Gandalf watched from the base, trying to understand the mechanics. The formation had arranged itself with mechanical precision. The strongest at the bottom, braced against rock, hands locked around ankles of climbers above. Each person became a rung, bodies stacked and interlocked, black lacquer at connection points fusing them into a single coherent structure. "That shouldn't be possible," Aragorn said quietly. "The weight distribution alone, the bottom climbers should collapse under that load." "The lacquer is load-bearing," Kael'Rin observed. He was studying the formation with professional interest, the way someone might examine a particularly clever piece of engineering. "It's not just adhesive, it's creating structural integrity across the whole network. The bottom isn't supporting the top. The entire ladder is supporting itself as a single unit." Stella had gone pale. The journals mentioned this. They called it composite architecture, using victims as building materials. The cult was experimenting with creating permanent structures, walls, bridges, even towers, made entirely of lacquered people, living construction that could repair itself, adapt to terrain. "And this is the prototype," Gandalf said. He could see the candidate now, being passed up the ladder hand to hand like cargo. A young man, barely conscious, with a faint burn mark on his forehead in the shape of a crown. They're taking him to the top, to the ritual site. The White Stag had led them to a different route, a narrow chimney in the rock face 20 yards to the left of the living ladder. Natural stone with enough handholds to make climbing possible, but it would be slow, technical, and the lacquered ladder was nearly at the top already. "We can't match their speed," Aragorn said, already assessing the chimney climb. "By the time we reach the top, they'll have the candidate positioned and the ritual started." "Then we don't try to match their speed," Gandalf replied. "We disrupt their structure, bring the ladder down before they complete the climb." "How?" Stella asked. "The shard is already damaged. If we use it again—" "We don't use the shard," Gandalf interrupted. "Not yet. We save it for the ritual site itself, but we have other tools." He raised his staff, heat gathering at the tip, and immediately felt how little he had left to work with. The ice crossing had depleted him badly. What remained was barely enough for basic warming, let alone offensive action. "Gandalf," Kael'Rin said carefully, "you're not strong enough for a direct assault. If you try to burn through the lacquer—" "I'm not going to burn through it," Gandalf said. "I'm going to create instability. The ladder works because every component is synchronized. Same rhythm, same timing, same load distribution. If we break that synchronization, even briefly, the structure fails." "The same principle as the blockade," Stella said, understanding dawning. "But without the shard, how do we break synchronization?" Gandalf pointed with his staff. "There, at the top of the formation. See that figure directing the climb? The one whose head movements precede everyone else's by a fraction of a second?" Kael'Rin looked where Gandalf indicated and nodded slowly. "The rhythm leader, the sync node controlling the whole formation." "Exactly," Gandalf confirmed. "The Lacquered aren't a hive mind. They're a network with a central coordinator. Disrupt the coordinator and the network loses cohesion." "But the coordinator is 40 feet up," Aragorn pointed out. "How do we reach them without climbing through the formation ourselves?" The White Stag made a sound. Not quite a bark, not quite a bellow, but something between that carried across the escarpment like a signal. Then it moved. It charged the base of the living ladder at full speed, antlers lowered, a battering ram of muscle and bone and inexplicable intent. The impact was tremendous. The stag hit the bottom rung of the ladder, the braced figures supporting the entire structure, with enough force that Gandalf heard the collision from 20 yards away. The Lacquered at the impact point staggered, formation breaking, and suddenly the carefully distributed load was uneven. The ladder swayed. "Now!" Gandalf shouted. "While it's unstable!" He didn't have enough heat for a sustained assault, but he had enough for precision. a focused beam of warmth directed not at the lacquer itself, but at the rock face directly behind the rhythm leader. The stone heated, expanded slightly, and a small shelf that the leader had been bracing against crumbled. The leader's footing failed. Arms windmilled, trying to maintain balance, and for one critical second, the rhythm faltered. The entire ladder stuttered. Hands that had been locked in perfect synchronization loosened slightly. Weight shifted incorrectly. The lacquer bonds, stressed beyond their tolerances, began to stretch. Aragorn saw the opportunity and took it. He couldn't reach the leader directly, but he could reach the ladder's base. He drove forward with his shoulder, not trying to cut, just disrupting the formation with pure physical force. 3 of the bottom-rung Lacquered stumbled, fell, the network breaking at its foundation. The ladder collapsed, not completely, not all at once, but in sections. Bodies fell, some catching themselves, others dropping hard onto stone and snow. The synchronized formation became a chaotic tumble of confused, disoriented people trying to remember how to control their own limbs. The candidate fell with them. Gandalf saw him drop, saw hands reach to catch him and miss, saw him hit the ground in a heap of tangled limbs and torn clothing. Stella was already running toward him, Kael'Rin close behind. Gandalf maintained his position, staff raised, watching for Lacquered, who might reform and try to recapture their cargo. But they didn't. The rhythm was broken, the synchronization shattered. Individual people lay groaning or crying or simply staring at their hands in confusion, as if seeing them for the first time. The network had failed, and without it, they were just victims, exhausted, traumatized, but free. The White Stag extracted itself from the tangle at the ladder's base. It had blood on one antler, not its own, Gandalf thought, but from the impact. It shook its head once, snorted, and then simply walked away, vanishing into the fog as if it had never been there at all. Stella reached the candidate first. She rolled him onto his back, checking for injuries, trying to assess how badly he'd been hurt in the fall. "Alive," she called back, breathing, disoriented but conscious. The candidate, barely 20 years old, with the soft features of someone who'd probably never expected to be in a situation like this, blinked up at her with unfocused eyes. "Where?" he managed. "What? The song? It was so cold." "You're safe," Stella told him, which was a lie, but a necessary one. "We've got you. You're not going to be crowned." Kael'Rin was already checking the candidate for lacquer marks. "He's clean." They hadn't started the coding process yet. He was just cargo, being transported to the ritual site before processing, which meant they'd arrived in time. Barely. Another few minutes and the candidate would have been at the top, would have been positioned in whatever crown pattern the cult had prepared. Aragorn joined them, breathing hard, left shoulder clearly paining him. The freed Lacquered? "Recovering," Gandalf said. He was watching the scattered victims, counting. 11 total, all showing signs of awareness returning, some injuries from the fall, but nothing immediately fatal. One of the freed Lacquered, a middle-aged woman with lacquer residue still visible at her wrists, struggled to her feet and approached. "The others," she said, voice hoarse. "The ones still under control. They went ahead, up another route. You didn't stop all of them." Gandalf felt something cold settle in his chest. "How many?" 6, maybe 7, the woman said. "They broke off from the main formation before the ladder fell, climbed faster, lighter. They're probably at the top already," which meant the cult still had a partial formation at the ritual site, still had resources, still had the capability to continue the ceremony. Could they use someone else? Aragorn asked the woman. "For the crowning? Does it have to be this specific person?" The woman shook her head. "I don't know. I was only conscious for moments. But I heard things while I was under, whispers in the network. The crown needs a resonance match, someone whose life rhythm harmonizes with the rift. That's why they chose him." She pointed to the candidate. "Without him, the ritual fails." "Or they find someone else who's attuned," Kael'Rin said quietly. "Or they force the attunement through the lacquer." Gandalf made the decision. "We climb." Now, the candidate comes with us. We can't risk leaving him here. The freed Lacquered will have to manage their own descent. He looked at the woman. Can you lead them down? Get them away from here? She nodded. I remember the way we came up. But you, be careful. The things they were planning, the things I felt through the network. She shuddered. The rift is hungry, and the cult has been feeding it for weeks. We know, Gandalf said. We'll be careful. It was another necessary lie. They moved to the chimney. Kael'Rin went first, testing holds, setting a rope for the others. Then the candidate, guided by Stella. Then Aragorn, managing despite the injured shoulder. Gandalf brought up the rear, staff strapped to his back, using the last dregs of warmth to keep the cold from seizing their muscles mid-climb. Below them, the freed Lacquered began their descent, supporting each other. Above them, barely visible through the fog, the ritual site waited, and somewhere in that fog, 6 or 7 Lacquered were already there, preparing something worse than anything they'd faced so far. The climb continued. Cold stone, numb fingers, lungs burning, but still moving, still climbing, still refusing to stop. The chimney climb was brutal. Kael'Rin led, finding handholds in rock that felt deliberately hostile. Smooth where it should be rough, crumbling where it should be solid. The White Zone's influence extended even to the stone itself, making every grip uncertain, every foothold a gamble. Behind him came the candidate, moving with the awkward determination of someone who'd never climbed anything more challenging than a ladder. Stella stayed close, calling out instructions, steadying him when his grip faltered. "Left hand up," she said. "There's a crack. Feel it? Good. Now your right foot. Don't look down." The candidate, his name was Aaron, he'd told them during a brief rest, was shaking, not just from cold or exertion, but from the delayed shock of realizing how close he'd come to something worse than death. The crown mark on his forehead was angry red against pale skin, a brand that would probably scar. "How did they choose you?" Stella asked, partly to keep him focused, partly because she genuinely needed to know. "I don't know," Aaron said between labored breaths. "I was traveling, merchant's assistant, delivering goods to the northern settlements. We camped too close to the zone. I woke up and everyone else was different, moving wrong, speaking in unison. They tested me somehow, put their hands on my chest and hummed, and I felt," he shuddered, "I felt something answer, inside me, like a string being plucked." "Resonance," Gandalf said from below. He was climbing slowly, conserving energy, but his voice carried clearly in the thin air. "The rift has a frequency. Most people are naturally discordant with it. Their life rhythms clash. But some people, by accident of birth or circumstance, harmonize. You're one of them." "Is that why the shard works for me?" Stella asked. "Why I can use it when others can't?" "Probably," Gandalf confirmed. "Though your resonance is different, trained, not innate. The cult shaped you to harmonize with the key song fragments. Aaron's attunement is natural, which makes him more valuable to them and more dangerous." "Dangerous how?" Aaron asked, pulling himself up another few feet. "Because if they crown you, if they complete the ritual with you as the anchor, the rift won't just stabilize," Gandalf explained. "It will crystallize around your specific frequency. The White Zone will become permanent, and it will spread. Slowly at first, then faster. Within a year, this entire region would be consumed. Within 5, it could reach populated areas." The silence that followed was broken only by the scrape of boots on stone and the rasp of labored breathing. "So I'm not just a victim," Aaron said quietly. "I'm a weapon. If they get me, they win." "Yes," Gandalf said, no point softening it. "Which is why we're taking you away from here, far away, somewhere the cult can't reach." "But they'll find someone else," Aaron said. "Someone else who resonates. You said it's natural, which means there are others." "There are," Gandalf admitted. "But finding them takes time, testing, resources. Every day we deny the cult their candidate is a day the rift remains unstable, and an unstable rift can be closed, a crowned one cannot." Aragorn had been quiet during the climb, focusing on managing his injured shoulder, but now he spoke. "How many Lacquered did the woman say went ahead?" 6 or 7, Kael'Rin called down. "Why?" "Because I'm wondering what they're doing up there," Aragorn said. "If they don't have a candidate, they can't complete the ritual, so what are they preparing?" It was a good question. Gandalf had been wondering the same thing. The cult wasn't stupid. They had to know the ladder had fallen, had to know their candidate was lost. So why maintain a presence at the ritual site? Insurance, Stella said suddenly. Or adaptation. The journals mentioned the cult's flexibility, their willingness to improvise when primary plans failed. If they can't crown Arryn, maybe they're preparing to crown someone else, someone from their own formation. "But you said the resonance has to be natural," Aragorn objected. "Can they force that?" "The lacquer conducts," Stella said. "It links people together, shares rhythms. If they had someone who was close to resonance, not perfect, but close, they might be able to use the network to amplify them, push them into alignment with the rift artificially." Gandalf felt the implications settle like cold stone in his gut. "Then the Lacquered at the top aren't just guards. One of them is a backup candidate." "Which means they'll start the ritual regardless," Kael'Rin said. "With or without Arryn." The climb suddenly felt more urgent. Gandalf pushed harder, ignoring the protest from muscles that had been working without proper rest for too long. Above him, he could hear the others accelerating too, even Arryn, moving with the desperate speed of someone who understood that his rescue meant nothing if the ritual succeeded anyway. The chimney opened onto a narrow ledge. Kael'Rin hauled himself up first, then reached down to help Arryn. Stella followed, then Aragorn, and finally Gandalf, who collapsed briefly against the rock face, chest heaving. The ledge overlooked the ritual site. It was a ring of standing stones, not natural formations but deliberately placed, ancient beyond reckoning. In the center, barely visible through swirling fog, was the rift itself. Not a tear in the air, but a wound in reality, a vertical slash, maybe 8 feet tall, that pulsed with sickly blue-white light. The edges wavered like heat distortion, and the space around it seemed to bend wrongly, geometry failing in ways that hurt to perceive. And arranged in a semicircle around the rift were 6 lacquered figures, standing perfectly still, hands linked, forming the beginning of a pattern that Gandalf recognized from Stella's descriptions. The crown formation, incomplete, waiting for the final piece. In the center of their semicircle stood a 7th figure, not lacquered, at least not completely, a woman, maybe 30 years old, with the cultist brand visible on her neck. She was chanting something, voice low and rhythmic, and with each phrase the rift pulsed in response. "That's the backup," Stella whispered. "She's attuned. Not as strongly as Arryn, but enough. They're trying to force the resonance." "Can they do it?" Aragorn asked. "Given enough time, probably," Stella said. "The lacquer network is amplifying her natural frequency. Look," she pointed to the linked lacquered. "They're not just standing there. They're humming, feeding their combined rhythm into her, pushing her closer to alignment." Gandalf studied the formation, counting resources, calculating odds. 6 lacquered, 1 cultist conductor, and a rift that was already responding to the forced attunement. Against that, 5 exhausted people, 1 injured ranger, 1 terrified candidate, a cracked key song shard, and a wizard running on fumes. "We have to break the formation before she achieves full resonance," he said. "Once she's crowned, it's over." "The shard," Stella said, already unwrapping it. "We use it now. Break the network, disrupt the attunement." "That's the second use," Kael'Rin warned. "The shard won't survive many more." "It doesn't have to survive many more," Gandalf said. "It has to survive this one. Stella, can you do it? Break 6 linked lacquered from this distance?" Stella looked at the shard in her hands. The crack that had been halfway across was now nearly 3/4. The crystal structure was visibly compromised, fragments held together more by luck than integrity. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I have to try." She closed her eyes, finding the rhythm of the chanting cultist, feeling for the discordance. Kael'Rin moved beside her, watching the formation, ready to call out timing. Aragorn checked his sword, preparing for what would come after the disruption. Aaron stayed low, trying to be invisible, trying not to be the liability he knew he was, and Gandalf gathered what little warmth remained, preparing to shield them when the rift reacted to the shard's pulse. "On my mark," Kael'Rin said, counting under his breath. 3, 2, 1, mark, Stella sang. The shard blazed with light, not warm, not cold, but something between that felt like sound made visible. The counter-rhythm pulsed outward in waves, cutting through the fog, striking the linked formation like a physical blow. 2 of the Lacquered stumbled. The network wavered. The cultists' chanting faltered for half a second, but it wasn't enough. The remaining 4 held formation, compensating for the disruption, feeding more rhythm into the conductor to stabilize her. "Again!" Gandalf shouted. "Harder!" Stella drew breath and sang again, pushing more energy into the shard. The crystal responded, blazing brighter, pulsing stronger, and the crack widened. This time, 4 Lacquered broke free. The network collapsed. The cultist screamed as the amplification vanished, leaving her alone with a resonance she couldn't sustain on her own. The rift flared, angry, hungry, and for a moment Gandalf thought it would lash out, pull them all in. But then it settled, pulsing, returned to background hum. Unstable again, unsafe, but not immediately lethal. The cultist collapsed. The freed Lacquered scattered, confused and frightened. The ritual was broken. Stella looked down at the shard in her hands. The crack had propagated completely across. The fragment was now 2 pieces held together by nothing but surface tension and hope. "One more use," she said quietly. "Maybe, if we're lucky." "Then we save it," Gandalf said, "for the final closure, for stitching the rift shut." Below them, in the ritual ring, the rift continued its wounded pulsing. Still there, still dangerous, still waiting to be fed. But not today, not with this candidate. Today, they'd won. Barely. The ritual site felt wrong even after the formation collapsed. Gandalf stood at the edge of the stone ring, staff planted, trying to identify what exactly made the space so unsettling. It wasn't just the rift, though that was certainly part of it. It was the way sound behaved here. Voices didn't carry properly. Footsteps seemed to echo before they should, or not echo at all. The fog moved in patterns that suggested intent rather than wind. "We need to leave," Kael'Rin said. He was already scanning for routes down the far side of the escarpment. "The cult knows where we are now. They'll send reinforcements." "Agreed," Gandalf said, "but carefully. The White Zone is most dangerous when you're trying to navigate out of it. That's when the dead loops form." "Dead loops?" Aaron asked. The candidate was sitting with his back against one of the standing stones, exhausted and overwhelmed. "What are those?" "Terrain that repeats," Stella explained. She was rewrapping the fractured shard with shaking hands, trying not to think about how little integrity remained. You walk in what feels like a straight line, but you end up back where you started. Over and over. The locals say people have died in dead loops, walking until they collapsed from exhaustion, never realizing they were trapped. "The zone is most active when it senses retreat," Kael'Rin added. "It punishes people trying to leave, as if it wants to keep them." Aragorn was checking the freed Lacquered, making sure none of them were injured badly enough to slow the evacuation. 4 people, 3 men and the woman who'd been the backup candidate, all disoriented, all frightened, but mobile. "Can you walk?" he asked the woman. She nodded, though her eyes were unfocused. "I think so. I remember choosing this, volunteering, but I don't remember why. Like someone else made the decision and I just watched." "The lacquer rewrites consent," Stella said quietly. "Makes you want what it wants. You're not responsible for what you did under its influence." "Doesn't feel that way," the woman said. Gandalf understood. Violations of will left scars, even after the physical control ended. These people would carry what happened here for the rest of their lives. But that was a problem for later, after they survived the immediate present. "We move in single file," he ordered. "Kael'Rin leads. Stay close to the person ahead of you. If you see the same landmark twice, call it out immediately. Don't wait to be sure. Call it the moment you suspect. Understood?" Everyone nodded. They started down from the ritual site, following a narrow path that switchbacked along the escarpment's far side. The fog was thicker here, visibility dropping to maybe 15 feet. Gandalf maintained what little remained of his warming ward, but it was guttering now, barely enough to take the edge off the cold, certainly not enough to sustain them if they had to stop. They'd been walking maybe 10 minutes when Stella spoke up. "That tree," she said, pointing to a twisted pine barely visible through the fog. "We passed it before. I'm sure of it." Kael'Rin stopped, studying the tree, then the terrain around it. His expression darkened. "You're right. Same bark pattern, same angle. We've looped. But we've been going downhill the whole time," Aragorn said. "How can we be back at the same tree?" "Because the zone doesn't care about normal geography," Gandalf said. He could feel it now, the subtle wrongness in how space was behaving. They were walking through terrain that was folding in on itself, creating impossible topology. "We're in a dead loop. Kael'Rin, which direction did you lead us?" "Southwest," the tracker said, "following the natural descent, the path that should take us away from the rift and toward lower ground." "Then we try something else," Gandalf decided. "Northeast, uphill, against every instinct." "That takes us back toward the ritual site," one of the freed Lacquered protested. "Back toward danger. Or it takes us out of the loop," Gandalf countered. "Dead loops trap you by reinforcing what feels right. The path that looks safe, that follows natural terrain, that promises progress. The only way out is to do what feels wrong." They reversed direction, climbing back uphill, every step feeling like a mistake. The fog pressed closer, the cold intensified, and worst of all, sound started to drop away. The White Zone was breathing again, but differently this time. Instead of brief pulses of silence, the quiet was sustained, continuous, like walking through cotton that muffled everything beyond arm's reach. "I don't like this," Stella said, and her voice sounded distant even though she was right beside Gandalf. "Keep talking," Gandalf ordered. "Everyone, constant sound. The silence is how the loop maintains itself. If we fill the space with our own noise, we disrupt the pattern." So they talked, nonsense mostly, counting steps, describing what they could see, reciting anything that came to mind. Aragorn named every river he'd ever crossed. One of the freed Lacquered sang a children's song from his village. Aaron listed types of fabric he'd delivered as a merchant's assistant. And slowly the fog began to thin. Not dramatically, just enough to extend visibility from 15 feet to 20, then 25. The muffling quality of the air lessened. Sound began to carry normally again. "It's working," Kael'Rin said. "The loop is—" He stopped. Ahead, barely visible through the thinning fog, was the twisted pine, the same tree. Third time. "We're still trapped," Stella said, and Gandalf heard real fear in her voice now. "Then we're not being counterintuitive enough," Gandalf said. "We're still following a path, still moving in a coherent direction. That's the trap, assuming we need to move at all in a way that makes sense." "What's the alternative?" Aragorn asked. "Randomness," Gandalf said. "Complete abandonment of navigation logic. Kael'Rin, stop leading. Everyone, close your eyes." "You want us to walk blind?" one of the freed Lacquered said incredulously. "I want us to move without reference points," Gandalf corrected. "The loop works by creating expectations. You see terrain, you interpret it, you make decisions based on that interpretation. If we remove the interpretation, we remove the loop's ability to guide us." It was insane. It was also the only option that made sense in a place where sense itself was compromised. 20 steps, Gandalf said. Eyes closed, random direction. Then we stop, open eyes, and assess. They did it, stumbling over rocks, bumping into each other, moving in what felt like chaos. Gandalf counted under his breath. 20 steps then. Stop. Eyes open. The twisted pine was gone. In its place was new terrain, a small clearing with unfamiliar stones, and beyond it, barely visible, what looked like the edge of the White Zone proper. Regular forest. Normal fog. The border. "We're out," Kael'Rin said, disbelief clear in his voice. "The loop released us." "Because we stopped playing by its rules," Gandalf said. He felt exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. The zone feeds on patterns, on logic, on the human need for things to make sense. Deny it that, and it loses its grip. They moved toward the border, faster now, hope giving them energy that exhaustion should have denied. The fog continued to thin. Temperature rose slightly, still cold, but not the bone-deep wrongness of the White Zone proper. Stella stumbled, and when Aragorn caught her, she was crying, not from pain, from relief. "We made it," she said. "We actually made it." "We made it this time," Gandalf corrected. "The rift is still there, unstable but not closed, and the cult still has resources, still has motivation. This isn't over." "But we saved him," Stella said, nodding toward Arryn. "We stopped the crowning. That counts for something." "It counts for everything," Gandalf agreed, "for today. But tomorrow, the cult will adapt, will find new tactics, new candidates. This is a reprieve, not a victory." They crossed the border, the point where the White Zone's influence finally faded to background wrongness. The freed Lacquered collapsed immediately, bodies finally allowing themselves to acknowledge exhaustion now that immediate danger had passed. Kael'Rin found a defensible position under an overhang. Not perfect, but good enough to rest without being completely exposed. Aragorn distributed what little food remained in their packs. Stella sat apart, staring at the wrapped shard, clearly trying to decide whether it had been worth the cost. Arryn approached Gandalf, moving stiffly. "What happens to me now? The cult will keep looking. You said I'm valuable to them. As long as I exist, I'm a threat." "You're not a threat," Gandalf said. "You're a person who happens to be attuned to something you didn't ask for. That's not your fault, and it doesn't make you responsible for what others might do with you. But practically, you need to disappear," Gandalf said. "New name, new location, somewhere the cult's network doesn't reach. Can you do that?" Arryn nodded slowly. "I have family in the south, far south, coast villages the cult wouldn't know about." "Then go there," Gandalf said. "Today, if possible. Don't wait, don't hesitate, just vanish. And if they find someone else like me, then we stop them again," Gandalf said. "As many times as it takes, until we can close the rift permanently, until the White Zone is just a bad memory." Arryn looked back toward the fog that marked the zone's border. "Is that possible? Can something like that actually be closed?" "I don't know," Gandalf admitted. "But the alternative is accepting that it's permanent, and I'm not willing to do that." The White Stag appeared at the edge of the clearing, silent, sudden, as if it had always been there and they'd simply failed to notice. It regarded them for a long moment with those mirror-bright eyes, then turned and walked back into the fog. "It's going back," Stella said, "into the zone." "It lives there," Kael'Rin said, "or it's part of it. Either way, its job is done. It led us through, showed us the paths. Now it's returning to whatever purpose it serves." Gandalf watched the stag disappear and felt a strange gratitude toward something he didn't understand and probably never would. The creature had helped them, not out of kindness necessarily, but out of some alignment of interests that transcended normal categories of ally and enemy. The White Zone pulsed once in the distance, the rift's heartbeat still there, still hungry. But for today, they'd denied it. For today, they'd won. Tomorrow would bring new problems, but tomorrow wasn't here yet. The dead loop spat them out like something indigestible. One moment Stella was running against every instinct her body possessed, following Kael'Rin's counterintuitive path through terrain that kept folding back on itself. The next, the fog peeled away in a single brutal instant, and they stumbled into open air that tasted like iron and frost. The ruins sprawled before them in a shallow basin, ancient stone ribs poking through snow like the skeleton of something that had died badly. But it was the center that stopped Stella's breath. A ring of standing stones, each twice her height, arranged in a perfect circle, and inside that circle, driven into the frozen ground at precise intervals, were iron clamps. Massive things, each as thick as her forearm. Their surfaces worked with patterns that made her eyes ache if she looked too long. They formed a crown shape around a fissure in the earth, a crack that breathed, literally breathed. Cold air pulsed up from the rift in visible waves, and wherever it touched, frost bloomed in geometric patterns across the stone. Not random crystallization, deliberate designs that looked like sound waves frozen mid-propagation. The patterns pulsed in rhythm with something Stella couldn't hear but could feel in her bones, a bass note below the threshold of hearing that made her back teeth ache. "Oh hell," Aragorn whispered. The Lacquered had arrived first. At least 40 of them, arranged in a perfect half-circle between the ruin's entrance and the ritual center. Silent, synchronized, their bodies formed a living wall, and as Stella watched, they began to move with that horrible fluid coordination, herding something, someone, toward the clamps, the candidate. Stella could just make out a figure in their midst, stumbling, supported by lacquered hands that gripped with mechanical precision. Even from this distance she could see the mark, a dark ring around the person's head like a crown-shaped burn or bruise. The crown trace, the signature of someone about to be used as a living keystone. "They're going to do it now," Gandalf said. His voice was rough, drained from maintaining the heat ward through the white zone. The thin shimmer of warmth around them flickered like a candle in wind. "The crowning. They'll bind the candidate to the clamps, use them as an anchor to stabilize the rift." Stabilize? Kael'Rin's eyes never left the formation below, tracking movement patterns, counting exits. "You mean, seal it?" "Worse." Gandalf leaned heavily on his staff, and Stella realized with a spike of fear just how much the journey had cost him. His face was gray, his hands trembling slightly. "They'll crown the wound, make it permanent. The white zone won't just stop expanding, it'll become fixed, immutable, a scar across reality that can never heal." Stella's hand went to the wrapped shard at her belt. Through the cloth, she could feel it humming, responding to the rhythm pulsing from the rift. 2 uses gone, 1 hairline crack and 1 visible chip marking the cost of the people they'd freed. 1 use left, 1 chance. "How long do we have?" Aragorn asked, testing his grip on his sword. His injured shoulder was still stiff, fingers not quite closing properly. Stella had seen him nearly lose the blade twice during the ice run. Kael'Rin studied the procession below, the careful way the Lacquered moved the candidate toward the center clamp. Minutes, maybe less. Once they position the candidate and complete the formation, he trailed off, but his meaning was clear. "Then we go now." Aragorn started forward, but Gandalf's staff blocked his path. "Look at the exits," the wizard said quietly. Stella looked. The ruins formed a natural arena, walls of tumbled stone on 3 sides, and the cliff they'd just descended on the 4th. 3 clear paths out, or there had been. As she watched, lacquered bodies began to flow toward those exits, not rushing, just filling the spaces, moving with that synchronized precision that made them so much more than a mob. "They're sealing us in," she said. "They knew we'd come." Kael'Rin's voice carried a note of grudging respect. "This isn't just a ritual site, it's a trap." The White Stag appeared on a rock outcrop above them, white against white, barely visible. It stood perfectly still, watching the ruins below with eyes that reflected too much intelligence, waiting. They want us here, Aragorn realized. Why? Gandalf studied the ritual layout, his eyes tracing the relationships between clamps, stones, and rift. Because we're variables. The crowning is a binding, a permanent structure. Variables are problematic. Better to contain them, neutralize them, or... His eyes widened slightly. Or incorporate them into the structure itself. You're saying they want to lacquer us? Stella's voice came out higher than she intended. Make us part of the seal? Not want, need. Gandalf gestured to the clamps, and Stella forced herself to look at them properly. The patterns weren't just decorative, they were structural, mathematical, and there were gaps, spaces in the crown where additional anchors would fit. The candidate alone isn't enough to crown a rift this size. They need more mass, more resonance. Stella thought of the freed Lacquered from the choke point, the woman who'd whispered a fragment of her name before passing out, thought of all the people who'd been consumed by this thing, turned into living tools. We could run, she said, not because she wanted to, but because someone had to say it, find another way, come back with, there is no coming back. Gandalf's voice was flat, final. The moment they complete the crowning, this becomes permanent. The white zone becomes a fixture of the world, and everyone trapped in it stays trapped. Forever. He looked at her directly. Including every person currently lacquered. They'll never wake up, never come back. They'll just be this, until they stop being anything at all. The shard pulsed against Stella's hip, a single warming throb that felt almost like encouragement. Or warning. Below them, the Lacquered reached the center. The candidate was positioned carefully, precisely, hands being guided toward specific clamps. Even from here, Stella could see the person trying to resist, weak movements against the synchronized strength holding them. The rift pulsed, and frost raced across the ground in a perfect circle. Kael'Rin, Aragorn said quietly. Which clamps? The scout's eyes had never stopped moving, cataloging, analyzing. 3 and 9 o'clock. If the rift's 12, those two are load-bearing. Everything else branches from them. Break those, the structure loses integrity. How do you know? Stella asked. Because they're positioned at the exact interval where the frost pulse starts. He pointed, and Stella saw he was right. The geometric patterns radiating from the rift all originated from those 2 points. They're not just anchors. They're tuning forks. The whole thing's an instrument, and those are the fundamental notes. Gandalf nodded slowly. Good eye. Yes. If we could damage those before the binding completes, we'd need to get through 40 Lacquered across open ground and break iron clamps the size of fence posts. Aragorn's tone was neutral, but his meaning was clear. Impossible. Not impossible. Kael'Rin's voice carried a strange calm, the tone of someone who'd already done the math and didn't like the answer but accepted it anyway. Just expensive. Stella knew what that meant. The shard. Their last use. If they burned it now, they might free enough Lacquered to create chaos, open a path, but then they'd have nothing left for the rift itself. And if they saved it for the rift but couldn't reach it, there's no good option, she said. No. Gandalf's agreement was gentle. Just choices, and we're out of time. Below them, the Lacquered began to close ranks, not rushing, not aggressive, just filling in, shoulder to shoulder, creating layers. The exits were already blocked. The arena walls were too smooth to climb quickly. And in the center, the candidate was being pressed against the first clamp, hands being positioned just so. The rift pulsed again, stronger. The sound wave patterns in the frost grew more complex, more purposeful, like a sentence being written one letter at a time. Stella felt the temperature drop another degree, then another. Gandalf's heat ward flickered, strengthened with visible effort, flickered again. If we go in, Aragorn said slowly, we're committing. No retreat. No second chances. Yes, Kael'Rin agreed, and if we wait, everyone dies, including us eventually. The scout's eyes tracked the lacquered formation, noting weak points that probably didn't exist. The white zone is still killing us, just slower than the alternative. The white stag moved on its outcrop, turning its head to look directly at them. Its eyes were dark and knowing, and in them Stella saw something like encouragement, or maybe challenge. The distinction felt academic. "It knows something," she said. "It knows we're afraid." Aragorn's hand tightened on his sword despite the pain it clearly caused. "And it knows fear's going to kill us faster than cold." "Inspiring," Gandalf muttered, but there was warmth in it. Affection. He straightened despite his exhaustion, drawing himself up. "All right, here's what matters. That candidate down there is a person. Those lacquered are people. The rift is a wound, and wounds can heal, but not if they're crowned. Not if we let this become permanent." "So we stop it," Stella said. "So we stop it," Gandalf agreed. "Together, ugly as it needs to be, fast as we can make it, and we do not—" His voice sharpened. "We do not stop moving. The moment we stop in the white zone, we start dying. The lacquered know that. They'll try to pin us, glue us down, make us part of the structure. So we move, we hit hard, and we trust each other. Understood?" Aragorn nodded. Kael'Rin made a small gesture of acknowledgement. Stella wrapped her fingers around the shard, feeling its hum intensify. "Understood. Then let's go be heroes." Gandalf smiled, tired and real. "Or die trying. I understand that's also traditional." They started down into the basin. The Lacquered saw them immediately. How could they not? But didn't react with alarm. No shouts, no rush to intercept, just smooth, synchronized movement as bodies flowed to block the most direct paths, filling space with that horrible efficiency. Stella realized they weren't panicking because they'd already planned for this, had already accounted for exactly 5 intruders. The math was done. The structure was designed to absorb them. "They think we're already part of it," she whispered. "Then let's prove them wrong," Aragorn said, and broke into a run. The arena swallowed them whole. Aragorn hit the first line of Lacquered with his shoulder, not his sword. The blade was for killing, and these people were victims. His shoulder was for making space. The impact drove air from his lungs, like hitting a wall of flesh that gave exactly enough to absorb force. And then hands were on him, lacquered fingers seeking grip, trying to lock him in place. He twisted, using momentum, and felt hands slip on his cloak. Training took over. Low center of gravity, constant motion, never plant both feet. The Lacquered moved like a single organism, and organisms had predictable patterns. "Left," Kael'Rin's voice cut through the muffled air, and Aragorn shifted without thinking. A gap opened and he slipped through, pommel checking a jaw as he passed. Not to injure, just to disorient. Behind him, Gandalf's staff blazed with focused warmth. It wouldn't burn the lacquer away, but it kept it from setting, kept the Lacquered from fusing. "Corridor!" Aragorn called, and kept moving. His job, carve a path to the center, keep the Lacquered focused on him, not on Stella and Kael'Rin moving in his wake. Draw aggression, absorb pressure, and above all, keep moving, because the moment he stopped, his boot slipped and his injured shoulder screamed. Lacquered hands reached for him and he rolled under their grasp, coming up hard against stone. Pain lanced through his shoulder. His sword grip weakened and he nearly dropped the blade. 20 feet to the center, might as well be 20 miles. Kael'Rin worked in the spaces Aragorn created. His job was precision. While the ranger battered through formations, Kael'Rin identified rhythm leaders, individuals whose movements coordinated the rest. A tilted head here, shifted weight there, the adjustments that kept 40 people moving as one. There, a woman in the second rank, shoulders square, breathing, setting tempo. Kael'Rin ghosted close and matched her rhythm. Breathed when she breathed, shifted when she shifted. For 3 heartbeats he was part of the formation. Then he broke pattern, one sharp exhalation disrupting his rhythm by a fraction. The woman's breathing stuttered, her rhythm faltered. Like dominoes, the lacquered around her lost synchronization. Aragorn burst through before it closed. 3 and 9, Kael'Rin called, confirming the critical clamps. Load bearing! Stella's voice rose behind him, warming up. Kael'Rin positioned at her shoulder, one hand on her elbow, maintaining contact, becoming her anchor. Breathe with me, he said quietly. In when I squeeze, out when I release. Her breathing synchronized with his touch. When the moment came, she'd need to pull air from burning lungs on rhythm or everything would collapse. Ahead, the candidate was being pressed against the clamp. Aragorn was pinned, Gandalf was fading, the heat ward shrinking. Time was running out. Gandalf knew exactly how much power he had left. Not enough. The rift pulsed, each pulse trying to drink warmth from his bones. Not just cold, absence. His staff provided resistance, but reality pushed back, and reality always won eventually. How long? Stella asked. Minutes, he said. Maybe less. His job was hardest. Hold the rift while everyone else worked. Stand still while his own warning rang. Never stop in the white zone. Feeling cold creep deeper. He'd seen wounds like this before. Tears where reality bled into unreality. Usually they sealed themselves, but this one was being held open by ritual geometry. Crown the wound. Make permanent what should be temporary. Once that happened, even his power couldn't undo it. Not today, Gandalf whispered, pouring warmth into the shield. The rift pulsed, hungry. The ward flickered, held, barely. The White Stag charged without warning. One moment watching, next moment in motion, antlers lowered, crashing into the 9 o'clock clamp. Metal rang like a bell. The clamp shifted, pulled partially free. The lacquered swarmed it, covering metal like living glue, sealing it back with their mass. Perfect synchronization, deeply wrong. Aragorn saw the opportunity. Cover me! He sprinted toward the 3 o'clock clamp while Lacquered focused on the stag. Kael'Rin moved with him. Stella pulled along. Gandalf brought the ward, stretching it thin, gasping. 10 feet. 5. Almost. The Lacquered finished at 9 o'clock. As one, they turned and began building overhead. Stella saw bodies moving upward, hands linking, lacquer sealing joints, creating structures that defied physics, climbing each other, building. They're making a dome, Kael'Rin said, to seal us in, living architecture, a roof over the ritual center, not protection, a trap. Her hand went to the shard. Through cloth she felt it burning, resonating with the rift, the crack visible, the chip leaving a divot, one use left. Wait, Kael'Rin said. Not yet. They're building a cage. If you fire too early, they'll rebuild. We need everyone freed at once. His hand squeezed. Breathe in, and she pulled air into burning lungs. Aragorn reached the clamp and swung two-handed. Metal rang, barely scratched. He swung again, shoulders screaming, and his hand slipped. The sword clattered down. Lacquered hands grabbed him, holding, pressing, pinning him to stone. Not yet, Kael'Rin repeated. He's buying time. Above the dome grew, bodies linking, fusing, air thickening, temperature dropped. Gandalf's ward flickered, steadied through sheer will. The candidate positioned for final binding, hands pressed to metal. The rift pulsed. Now, Kael'Rin said. Stella, now. She unwrapped the shard, warm, almost hot. The damage worse, crack running halfway across, chip creating rough edge. Sing, Kael'Rin said. I've got you. She couldn't feel her lips, could barely breathe, but she'd trained for this. She opened her mouth and pulled air. The first note came rough. The shard flickered. Again, slower. This time the note steadied. The shard hummed in harmony, making air vibrate. Lacquered heads turned, listening, confused. Counter cadence, break their rhythm. Stella shifted frequency, clashing with the rift's pulse. The shard intensified, The crack widened. Above, dome construction faltered. Bodies lost sync. Gaps appeared. More. Everything you have. Stella pulled air and sang, discordant and powerful. The shard resonated violently, burning her palm. The crack split wider. The dome collapsed, bodies unlinking, falling with confused cries. People tumbling, landing hard, waking mid-fall. Aragorn tore free, grabbed his sword. The stag burst from its prison and charged center. The shard screamed like breaking glass and split completely, halves grinding, cutting skin. Every Lacquered staggered, blinked, came awake. Dome fell apart. 40 people collapsed, free and alive. The candidate fell toward the rift. The stag caught them with antlers, pulling back. Shard fragments dissolved, pulled toward the rift. Gandalf, now! The wizard raised his staff, speaking ancient words. Fragments stuck to the rift's edge, anchor points, and he began stitching. The rift fought, pulsed, but Gandalf kept working. The stag turned, then charged the 3 o'clock clamp. Metal shrieked, clamp tore free, ritual geometry shattered, the rift began closing. Gandalf's magic accelerated, fragments pulsed once, twice, 3 times, dark. The rift sealed with a sigh. White zone pressure lessened, still present but no longer killing. Stella collapsed, hands bleeding. 40 freed people sobbed and lived. The stag bounded into fog and vanished. Gandalf fell to one knee, smiling. It worked. Stella looked at empty hands. Their last key. Gone. They'd won. Lost their only weapon. Move, Aragorn said, helping Gandalf up. Get these people out. Where do we go? Someone asked. Stella had no answer, but she stood anyway, kept moving, didn't stop. The dome was almost complete. Stella watched in horror as lacquered bodies continued their upward construction, hands linking with mechanical precision, lacquer sealing joints into something that shouldn't be structurally possible. They were building a living roof over the ritual center, and once it closed, there would be no escape. Kael'Rin, she whispered, we're running out of time. I know. His hand remained on her elbow, steady. But if we fire now, we won't break enough synchronization. They'll rebuild. And if we wait too long, we're trapped. Yes. So we wait until the last possible second. Then you sing like your life depends on it. Because it did. Aragorn was still pinned near the 3 o'clock clamp, lacquered hands holding him against stone. He wasn't fighting, conserving energy, waiting for the opening. His sword lay 3 feet away, frost forming on the blade. Gandalf stood at center, staff raised, heat ward, flickering like a dying candle. His face was gray, lips blue-tinged. He was burning through his last reserves just to keep them from freezing. The White Stag was buried under bodies at the 9 o'clock clamp, only antler tips visible. It had stopped thrashing. Overhead, the dome continued to grow. Bodies positioned at load-bearing angles, lacquer creating joints that turned flesh into construction material. The people building it weren't conscious. They were tools, victims building their own cage. How many? She asked. Kael'Rin tracked the formation. 32 in the dome, 8 holding the stag, 0 in reserve. They've committed everything. That's good, right? Or confident. If the dome completes, they don't need reserves. His hand squeezed. Breathe in. Once you sing, it's chaos. 40 confused people waking up in the worst moment of their lives. Stella thought about the woman from the choke point who'd whispered her name and collapsed crying. About waking up part of a living structure, hanging in midair, no memory of how you got there. They'll fall, she said. Yes. Some will get hurt. Probably. But if we don't break the dome, they stay lacquered forever. Kael'Rin's voice was gentle but unyielding. There are no good options, just necessary ones. A gap closed overhead. Only 3 openings remained, triangular spaces between fused bodies. Stella could see faces, a young man, barely 20, an older woman with gray hair, a child. Oh God, Stella whispered. I know, I see them. His voice tightened. All the more reason to break this now. Another gap closed. 2 openings left. Temperature dropped. Stella's breath came in visible puffs. She couldn't feel her toes anymore. Couldn't feel her fingers except where they gripped the shard. Warm, almost hot, resonating with increasing intensity. Gandalf made a sound between gasp and groan. The heat ward contracted sharply, pulling closer to his body. "Gandalf," Aragorn called, "talk to me. Still here, but not for much longer. Whatever you're going to do it soon." 1 gap left, a single triangular opening directly above the rift, and 3 Lacquered began positioning to close it. Slowly, carefully, bodies angling for the final structural joint. The rift pulsed, and frost patterns grew more complex. They looked almost like writing, binding glyphs Stella recognized from the cult, permanent seals. At center, the candidate was pressed fully against the clamp, hands positioned precisely, and the crown trace glowed faintly, actually glowing, dull red luminescence pulsing with the rift. The ritual was entering its final phase. Kael'Rin, "Not yet. 3 more seconds. Let them commit." "We don't have 3 seconds." "We do. Trust me. 1, 2. The final gap began to close, bodies shifting, lacquer sealing. "Now," Kael'Rin said. Stella unwrapped the shard. The damage was severe. The crack ran halfway across. The chip left a rough divot. Smaller fractures radiated like spiderweb. It was dying. Not just warm, but hot, almost burning. The resonance was wrong, irregular, like a heartbeat with skipped beats. "Stella." Kael'Rin's voice cut through her thoughts. "Look at me." She did. His eyes were calm, focused, confident. "You've done this twice already. This is just one more time. Last time. Everything you have, and then it's over. Understood?" She nodded. "Good. Now breathe with me. In, squeeze, and out." She pulled air into lungs that felt like ice. Again, deeper. Another breath, slower, controlled. Once more, "Fill everything." She breathed. The shard pulsed. "Now, sing." Stella opened her mouth and let the first note emerge. It came rough, uncertain, vocal cords stiff with cold. The shard flickered, resonance stuttering, and for a horrible moment she thought it wouldn't work. Then Kael'Rin's hand squeezed, steady rhythm, and she found the beat. The second note came clearer. The shard's pulse steadied, synchronizing. Not perfectly. The crack created harmonics that shouldn't exist, but enough. The sound built, and she shifted into counter cadence, the frequency that clashed with the rift. Overhead, the Lacquered paused. Just a heartbeat. Synchronization stuttering. "More," Kael'Rin said. "Don't hold back." Stella pulled air, deep, painful, burning cold, and let it out as sound. The counter cadence poured from her throat, discordant and powerful, the opposite of the rift's pulse, a negation made of pure frequency. The shard resonated violently, heat building until it burned her palm, and she saw the crack widen, split deeper. The Lacquered at the dome's peak lost synchronization completely. Hands unlocked. Lacquer broke. Bodies became people again, and with nothing holding them, they fell. The dome collapsed in stages, sections peeling away. People tumbled, screaming or silent. The young man hit hard and lay still. The older woman caught herself halfway, dangling until that joint broke, and she fell the last few feet. The child, thank God, was lower and only dropped a body length before hitting snow. All around, Lacquered staggered. Synchronization shattered. 40 people blinked, gasped, came awake with confusion and terror. Near the clamp, hands holding Aragorn lost grip. He tore free, rolling, grabbing his sword, coming up defensive even though there was nothing left to fight. The Lacquered around him collapsed, sitting hard or catching themselves on stone. At the 9 o'clock clamp, bodies covering the White Stag dissolved. People peeled away, and the stag emerged, antlers first, then head, then full white body. It shook itself, ice scattering, and its eyes found Stella. In them, she saw approval. The shard screamed, actual sound, piercing, like crystal being tortured. Stella looked down and saw the crack splitting completely, halves grinding in her palm. The heat was unbearable, and she could smell burning skin, but she couldn't let go. Not yet. The rift pulsed, and every piece responded. The fragments, because it was fragments now, breaking into multiple pieces, began to glow. Pale blue, cold fire. Stella felt them being pulled. The rift wanted them. "Gandalf!" she shouted. "Now! It has to be now!" The wizard was already moving, staff raised despite exhaustion. His voice rose in words that predated common, syllables that hurt to hear, and power flowed from him like water from a breaking dam. The shard fragments tore from her grip. She felt skin rip as pieces pulled away, sharp edges cutting deep. Then they were airborne, flying, pulled toward the rift. They hit the edge and stuck there, embedding like surgical pins. Gandalf's power poured through those anchor points. Stella watched as the wizard stitched the rift closed, magic flowing like thread through needle holes, weaving, pulling the tear's edges together. The rift fought, pulsed, surged, tried to pull everything nearby, but Gandalf held firm. Slowly, grudgingly, the rift began to close. The candidate collapsed, falling toward the closing rift. The White Stag was there, 3 great bounds across the arena. Antlers caught the candidate's clothing, shoulder and hip, perfect precision, and momentum carried them both clear. They hit ground in controlled tumble, the stag keeping its body between person and danger. Safe. The rift pulsed final time, weaker. Stella felt the suction, felt herself pulled forward. Kael'Rin's hand locked on her wrist, full grip anchoring her. Around them, freed Lacquered scrambled away. Aragorn grabbed someone crawling the wrong direction and hauled them back. Gandalf kept stitching. The shard fragments pulsed, once, twice, 3 times, and went dark. Just stopped, like candles snuffed. The rift sealed with a sound like a sigh, frost patterns collapsing, and the pressure changed. The white zone's hostile presence lessened dramatically, not gone. Fog still pressed close, sound still dampened, but the active killing intent faded. It stopped trying to consume them. Gandalf fell to one knee, barely upright. His whole body shook, eyes distant, unfocused. "Did it work?" he whispered. "Yes," Kael'Rin said. "It's sealed." Stella looked around. 40 people in various states of collapse, some crying, some shocked silent, some helping others despite their trauma, all alive, all free, all human. "They're okay," Stella said. "Scared, hurt, but okay." "Good." Gandalf's eyes closed. "That's good." The White Stag looked at each of them, acknowledgement in its eyes, then turned and bounded into fog. White on white, visible 3 strides, then gone. Stella looked at her hands, both palms cut badly, blood running down wrists, empty. The shard was gone, consumed, their last key destroyed. They'd won, saved 40 people, sealed the rift, and lost their only weapon. "We need to move," Aragorn said, helping Gandalf stand. "Get these people somewhere less exposed." "Where?" Stella asked. "East," Kael'Rin said, studying fog patterns. "Sound is less dead that direction." Aragorn raised his voice. "We're moving out in 5 minutes. Help anyone who can't walk. We don't stop until we're clear." Stella moved to help a woman sitting alone, rocking. "Can you walk?" The woman looked up, eyes red, confused. "Where am I?" "You're safe now. Can you stand?" "I think, yes." All around, people helping people. Aragorn organizing, Kael'Rin scouting, Gandalf recovering. 40 people saved. 1 rift sealed. The aftermath had begun. The White Stag lowered its head and charged. Not at the Lacquered, not at the dome. At the 3 o'clock clamp, the load-bearing anchor that held half the ritual geometry in place. It moved with impossible speed, antlers gleaming white, and Stella had just enough time to understand what it was doing before the impact. The sound was tremendous. Metal shrieked, stone cracked. The clamp didn't break. The stag wasn't strong enough, but it tore partially free from the frozen ground. tilting sharply, and suddenly the entire ritual structure lost its symmetry. The rift pulsed violently in response, frost racing across every surface in chaotic patterns. The geometric precision collapsed into randomness, and Stella felt the change in her bones. The crowning was failing, but the dome overhead was almost complete. Only seconds left before the living lid sealed them inside permanently, and even with the ritual structure compromised, 40 lacquered bodies fused into a prison would be nearly impossible to escape. Kael'Rin's hand tightened on her elbow. Stella, now or never. She looked at the shard in her palm. The crack ran 3/4 across now. The chip had crumbled further, and new fractures spider-webbed from both damage points. It was hot enough to burn, pulsing erratically, barely holding together. One use left, one chance. And she knew, understood with absolute certainty, that this use would destroy it completely. The shard wouldn't just crack further, it would shatter, would be consumed. There would be nothing left, no more key, no more weapon, no way to fight the next rift, the next crowning. Just this moment, this choice. She looked at the candidate pressed against the center clamp, crown trace glowing brighter. At the dome overhead, gaps almost closed. At Gandalf barely standing. At Aragorn pinned and fighting. At 40 people stripped of their will, turned into living tools. At the child in the dome structure, slack-faced and unseeing. "Do it," she said. Kael'Rin's hand became her metronome. Squeeze, breathe in, release, breathe out. Stella filled her lungs despite the burning cold, despite the fear, and she sang, not tentatively, not building slowly, everything at once. Full throat, full power, every technique she'd learned and every ounce of will she'd developed. The counter cadence poured out of her like a physical force. The shard responded instantly, resonating so violently she almost dropped it. The heat became unbearable, actually burning her palm, and she smelled her own skin cooking but couldn't let go, wouldn't let go. The crack split wider, the chip crumbled, and the shard began to scream. Not her voice, the shard itself, producing sound that shouldn't be possible from crystal, a piercing wail that cut through the white zones, dampening like a knife, so loud and so wrong that even the Lacquered reacted. Overhead, the dome construction faltered, bodies stopped mid-movement, synchronization disrupted, hands that had been linking separated, lacquer seals broke apart before they could set. All around the arena, Lacquered turned toward the sound, confusion breaking through their blank expressions. "More!" Kael'Rin shouted. "Don't stop!" Stella couldn't have stopped if she'd wanted to. The shard was pulling the sound from her now, using her as a channel, and the counter cadence built until it felt like the air itself was vibrating. The rift pulsed in response, not harmonizing, but fighting. Two frequencies locked in opposition, reality caught between them. The shard split completely. Stella felt it come apart in her hand. Not an explosion, but a dissolution, the fundamental structure giving way all at once. The two halves ground against each other with a sound like breaking glass, cutting deep into her palm, then fragmented further. 4 pieces, 8, 16, each fragment glowing with cold blue light, each one resonating with the counter cadence, and all of them being pulled toward the rift. "Gandalf!" Stella screamed. "Now!" The wizard threw everything he had left into one final surge of power. His staff blazed white-hot. His voice rose in words that made her ears ache, syllables from a language that predated humanity, and magic poured from him like a dam breaking. The shard fragments tore free from Stella's grip. She felt skin rip, felt blood flow hot, and then the pieces were airborne, not falling. Flying, pulled by invisible force directly toward the rift. They moved in perfect formation, spreading out, and hit the tear's edge at precise intervals, embedding themselves like stitches in a wound. Gandalf's magic flowed through those anchor points immediately, using them as structural supports. Stella watched in awe as he literally wove reality back together, threads of power lacing through the shard fragments, pulling the rift's edges closed. The rift fought back with everything it had. It pulsed, trying to expand, tried to pull everything nearby into itself. Stella felt the suction, felt herself sliding forward despite Kael'Rin's grip. Aragorn was dragged 2 feet closer before he could brace. One of the freed Lacquered tumbled toward the center, screaming. The White Stag caught them with its antlers, hooking their clothing and yanking them back. Gandalf kept weaving, his face a mask of concentration and pain. Sweat ran down his temples despite the cold. His hands shook violently, but the threads kept flowing, kept pulling the tear closed inch by grudging inch. The dome overhead collapsed completely, with synchronization shattered and the shards scream drowning out whatever force coordinated the Lacquered. The living structure simply came apart. Bodies unlocked, lacquer seals broke, and 32 people fell. Some caught themselves on lower sections and climbed down. Some dropped straight to the ground, landing hard. The young man hit with a sickening thud and didn't move. The older woman tumbled and rolled, coming up bloody but conscious. The child fell into someone's arms, pure luck, and started crying immediately. All around the arena, Lacquered came awake mid-fall or mid-collapse, screaming, sobbing, utterly disoriented. 40 people experiencing the worst moment of their lives simultaneously, but alive, human, free. The shard fragments pulsed with light, once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession, then went dark. Not gradually, just stopped, like candles being snuffed. And in that moment of darkness, Gandalf pulled the final thread tight. The rift sealed with a sound like a sigh, almost relieved, as if reality itself was grateful to be whole again. The frost patterns collapsed into random shapes. The geometric precision vanished. The crown trace on the candidate's head flickered and faded. The ritual was broken. Stella felt the change immediately. The white zone's pressure, that constant hostile presence, the feeling of being hunted, lessened dramatically. Not gone entirely. The fog still pressed close, sound still dampened, but the active malevolence faded. It stopped trying to kill them. The candidate collapsed, suddenly released from whatever force had positioned them. They fell forward, directly toward where the rift had been, and even though it was sealed, the momentum carried them. The White Stag was there. It had moved from saving the falling Lacquered to the center in 3 great bounds. Its antlers caught the candidate's clothing at shoulder and hip with perfect precision, and the stag's strength pulled them clear, swinging them away from danger. They hit the ground together in a controlled tumble, the stag keeping its body between the person and where the rift had been, protective, deliberate. Then the candidate was safe, and the stag stood, breathing hard, steam rising from its white coat. Gandalf fell to both knees, his staff clattered from nerveless fingers. His whole body shook violently. When he looked up, his eyes were distant, unfocused. "Did it?" he started, voice barely a whisper. "Did it work?" "Yes." Aragorn was there somehow, supporting the wizard. "It's sealed. You did it." "The people?" Stella looked around through tears she hadn't realized she was crying. 40 people scattered across the arena in various states of trauma, some sitting in shock, some helping others despite injuries, some crying, some just breathing, grateful to be able to. The young man who'd fallen hard was moving now, slow, pained, but alive. The older woman was being helped up by 2 others, blood running from her forehead. The child was clinging to someone, sobbing, all alive, all free, all human again. "They're okay," Stella managed. Scared, hurt, but okay. "Good." Gandalf's eyes closed. "That's good." He slumped in Aragorn's grip, unconscious. Kael'Rin was at Stella's side immediately, examining her bleeding hands. "Deep cuts. You'll need stitches." "Later," she said, unable to look away from her empty palms. "The shard is gone, I know." His voice was gentle. "You did what you had to do. It was our only... I know that too, and you still did it, because 40 people needed you to. That's what matters. Stella wanted to argue, wanted to explain how catastrophic this loss was, how vulnerable they were now, but the words wouldn't come. She was too tired, too cold, too overwhelmed. She just looked at her bleeding hands. The White Stag stood in the center, next to the candidate who was now sitting up, dazed but aware. It looked at each of them in turn. Gandalf unconscious, Aragorn struggling to lower him gently, Kael'Rin bandaging Stella's hands, and Stella herself, empty-handed and exhausted. In the stag's dark eyes was something complex, not just approval, but understanding. It knew what they'd sacrificed, knew what it cost, and it bowed its head, just slightly, just once, in gratitude. Then it turned and bounded into the fog, white coat flashing between gray curtains visible for 3 strides before the white zone swallowed it completely. Gone. "We need to move," Aragorn said, his voice carrying despite exhaustion. "Everyone who can stand, stand. Everyone who can help someone else, do it. We're getting out of here." People responded slowly. Some helped others up. Some just sat and stared. A few started crying again. Stella forced herself to her feet despite the pain. "Where do we go?" someone asked. A middle-aged man with the crown trace still faintly visible. Kael'Rin was already studying the fog. "East. The zone is weaker that direction. We might reach the edge." "Might?" the man repeated. "It's the best I have." Aragorn lifted Gandalf, slinging the unconscious wizard across his shoulders. "Then east it is. Injured in the middle, strongest outside. We move together, we move steady. Clear?" Murmurs of agreement. Stella moved to help a woman struggling to stand. The woman leaned heavily, grateful. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't remember. What happened?" "You're safe now. That's what matters. Just stay with me." All around, people helping each other, supporting each other, trying to process trauma they didn't understand. Kael'Rin took point. Aragorn brought up the rear. Between them, a ragged line of survivors stumbled east into the fog. The white zone watched with cold indifference. The rift was sealed. The ritual was broken. The crowning had failed, but the scars remained. And somewhere in the distance, barely visible through fog, something moved. Something that walked with purpose and carried an object from the ruins, a broken iron clamp still marked with ritual symbols. Evidence, or a blueprint. The figure disappeared into the white, and the fog closed behind it like a door. The fog thinned gradually as they moved east. Not dramatically. The white zone didn't have clear borders, didn't end in a neat line. Instead, it faded by degrees, sound returning in increments, temperature rising so slowly Stella almost didn't notice until she could feel her toes again. They'd been walking for what felt like hours. Time moved strangely in the zone, elastic and unreliable. Kael'Rin led them through identical terrain, navigating by subtle changes only he seemed to perceive. Behind them, 40 freed Lacquered stumbled in various states of exhaustion. Some helped each other. Some walked alone, too shell-shocked for conversation. A few had collapsed and were being carried. Aragorn moved among them with quiet efficiency, offering water, adjusting bandages, keeping people moving. Gandalf remained unconscious across his shoulders, breathing shallow but steady. Stella's hands throbbed with every heartbeat. Kael'Rin had wrapped them in strips torn from his cloak, but blood seeped through. The cuts from the shard fragments were deep. She helped the woman beside her, middle-aged, crown trace still faintly visible, navigate broken stone. The woman hadn't spoken since asking what happened, just walked, eyes distant. "There," Kael'Rin said quietly, pointing ahead. Stella saw it, a change in the fog's density, lighter, thinner, and beyond that, a hint of something that wasn't gray, color, green, trees maybe, real ones. "Is that?" someone started. "The edge," Kael'Rin confirmed. 100 yards. Relief rippled through the group. Several people moved faster, drawn toward safety. "Slow," Aragorn called. "Steady pace." Stella counted steps, 50, 75, 90. Then they crossed some invisible threshold and the world changed. Sound returned fully. Bird calls, wind rustling leaves, footsteps suddenly loud and real. The fog peeled back like curtains, and Stella saw sky. Actual sky, pale winter blue, trees with natural bark, ground that was just ground. They were out. People collapsed immediately. The woman Stella had been helping sank to her knees and started crying. Quiet tears of relief and trauma. Stella sat down hard. Her hands screamed protest, but she didn't care. They were out. They were alive. Aragorn lowered Gandalf against a tree, checking vitals. Satisfied, he turned to survey the group. "Head count," he called. Kael'Rin was already counting. 43. 40 freed, plus the candidate, plus us 3. Injuries? Multiple contusions, possible fractures, hypothermia across the board, and serious lacerations. He gestured to Stella. "Later," Stella said weakly. "Now," Kael'Rin corrected, already moving toward her with supplies. "You'll lose those hands to infection." He unwrapped the makeshift bandages. The cuts looked worse in real light. Deep gouges across both palms, edges ragged, still bleeding. "This will hurt," he said, producing antiseptic. "I know." He cleaned the wounds with quick efficiency. Stella bit her lip hard. The antiseptic burned like fire, but Kael'Rin didn't slow. Then came the needle. Stella looked away, focusing on trees, sky, anything else. She felt each stitch as a sharp pull and tried not to think about what she'd lost. Around them, the freed Lacquered slowly returned to themselves. Some talked quietly, others sat in silence. A few had found each other and clung together. The candidate sat alone, crown trace still faintly visible. Young, early 20s with dark hair and haunted eyes. Aragorn approached carefully. "Can you tell me your name?" The candidate looked up slowly. "Mira, I think. Everything's confused." "That's normal. Do you remember how you got to the ritual site?" Mira's brow furrowed. "I was traveling, merchant caravan, then fog and cold, and they touched the crown trace, wincing. What did they do to me? They tried to use you as an anchor, but we stopped it. You're safe now." "Safe." Mira tested the word. "For how long?" The question hung unanswered. Kael'Rin finished the last stitch and tied it off. "Done. Keep them dry, change bandages daily, watch for infection." "Thank you," Stella managed. Gandalf stirred against the tree. Aragorn offered water. The wizard drank slowly, wincing. "Where are we?" "Outside the zone. Everyone made it." "The rift?" "Sealed. Completely." Gandalf's eyes closed in relief. Then he asked the question they'd been avoiding. "The shard?" "Gone," Stella said. "Destroyed in the sealing." Long silence. "So we have no way to fight the next one?" "No," Aragorn confirmed. "We're back to conventional methods." "Which won't work on a full formation," Kael'Rin added. "We got lucky this time. Next time we might not." "Then we find another way," Aragorn said firmly. "Document what we learned, train people to recognize the signs, and hope that's enough." Gandalf finished quietly. A shout interrupted them. One of the freed Lacquered, a young man, was pointing back toward the zone. "There, someone's still in there." Stella's heart sank. Had they miscounted? Kael'Rin was already moving. "Where?" "There, in the fog. I saw movement." They all looked. For a moment, Stella saw nothing but gray. Then she saw it, a figure, barely visible through the fog's edge. Not stumbling, walking with purpose, carrying something. Aragorn's hand went to his sword. Could be another survivor. The scout studied the movement. "No, that's not someone lost. That's someone who knows exactly where they're going." The figure paused at the fog's edge, just visible enough to make out a silhouette. They were holding something large and angular, metal, an iron clamp, one of the ritual anchors. Broken free, marked with symbols, carried away deliberately. "They're taking evidence," Gandalf said, struggling to sit up. "Or worse, a blueprint." The figure seemed to sense them watching. turned just slightly, and though Stella couldn't see their face, she felt the weight of their gaze, recognition, acknowledgement. Then the figure turned back and disappeared into the white zone, fog closing around them like water. "Should we follow?" Aragorn asked. "No," Kael'Rin said flatly. "We're in no condition, and the zone would kill us first. Then they get away with it, with the knowledge to create another crowning." Yes. Silence settled, heavy and uncomfortable. Stella looked at the spot where the figure had disappeared, then at her bandaged hands, then at the 40 people they'd saved. Brutal math. They'd won this fight, but the war was far from over. "We need to report this," Gandalf said, "to the council, the rangers, anyone who'll listen. Someone out there understands the ritual mechanics, who's collecting materials, who might try this again." "Will anyone believe us?" Mira asked. "They'll have to," Aragorn said, "because if they don't, and this happens again, there won't be anyone left to argue." He stood, addressing the group. "Rest for another hour. Then we move for the nearest settlement. Anyone who can walk, walks. Anyone who can't, we carry. We stick together until we reach civilization." Murmurs of agreement, exhausted but determined. Stella leaned back against a tree, cradling her bandaged hands. Her body ached, her voice was raw, her hands throbbed, but she was alive. They were all alive. For now, that had to be enough. She closed her eyes and listened to normal forest sounds. Birds, wind, quiet conversations. Not the hostile silence of the white zone. Not mechanical breathing of lacquered formations. Just life, messy, painful, but real. When she opened her eyes, Kael'Rin was sitting beside her, keeping watch, silent vigil. In the distance, the white zone's fog remained, a gray wall against the horizon, still there, still waiting, still hungry. But for now, they were on the other side, and that was a victory, however small. Stella looked at her empty hands one more time, then made herself stop. The shard was gone, their weapon destroyed, but they'd survived, and they'd learned, and they'd carry that knowledge forward. Whatever came next, whatever that figure was planning, they'd face it. Together. The hour passed. Aragorn organized the march. 43 survivors left the white zone behind, walking toward civilization, carrying stories that would change everything. Behind them, the fog watched with patient indifference, waiting. Always waiting.